She sat alone on a freezing train platform, wedding dress wrinkled beneath a heavy coat, clutching a crumpled note that read, "Too big. Sorry." Her fiancé had vanished without a word. No luggage cart, no goodbye, just shame hanging in the air like fog. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The wind that morning bit through Henry's coat like needles, but he didn't flinch. He stood at the edge of the station platform, arms folded, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. The world had become quieter since Martha died. Quieter and sharper, as though grief had pared everything down to cold essentials. He came to town only when necessary. Salt, coffee, nails, a spool of thread to mend a torn saddle. Nothing more. Nothing personal. The train had just arrived. A whistle still hung in the air like a cry left unanswered. Passengers trickled off, boots crunching on snow, voices muffled in scarves and steam. Families reunited with stiff hugs. A pair of children ran toward a waiting uncle. Laughter, motion, life. Henry watched it all from the fringe, like a ghost. Then he saw her. She didn't move, not even when the last passenger disappeared behind the general store. She sat bolt upright, the way a child might sit when told to behave. Her face was turned slightly away, but her stillness was unnatural, too exact, too deliberate, like someone holding in a scream. Her dress, a soft shade of lavender faded at the hem, bore the creases of long travel. There were tiny stitched roses at the collar, delicate, careful work that seemed at odds with the tremble in her jaw. Henry's gaze drifted lower. Her hands, gloved in brown suede, gripped a suitcase like a lifeline. The leather strap was frayed where the fingers clenched. Balanced atop the case was a folded note, creased and damp. The words stared up at the sky, raw and brutal in their simplicity. Too big. Sorry. He didn't need the rest of the story. Something in his chest shifted, something like pity, but heavier. It was the way she didn't try to hide her tears, only sat with them like they were part of her now. He recognized that. The kind of grief you didn't fight anymore. The kind that settled in your bones and built a room for itself. She didn't look up, didn't notice him. And maybe that was what made him stay, just one step longer than he should have, watching her as the wind pushed curls of hair from beneath her bonnet as she blinked and blinked, but the tears kept coming. He didn't speak. Not yet. But for the first time in a year, Henry Cooper felt something stir that wasn't grief. It was recognition. The cold hadn't bothered Annie Whitmore as much as the silence. Not the silence of the snowy platform, nor of the town that had watched her arrival with sidelong glances and murmurs hidden behind scarves. No, this silence was internal, deeper than mere sound. It was the kind that creeps into a person when humiliation clamps tight around the throat and leaves no space for words. She hadn't cried on the train, not during the long ride from Kansas, not when she'd rehearsed in her mind what she might say to her husband-to-be, how she'd smile, how she'd speak in a voice gentle but bright. She hadn't cried when she stepped off and searched for his face among the crowd. Only when he looked at her, and didn't look again. Only then did her throat collapse around the truth. He hadn't said her name, hadn't offered an excuse, just handed the note to the station master, asked him to give it to the large one in lavender, and walked away. By the time she unfolded it, he was gone. Too big. Sorry. 3 words that reduced her to dimensions. A body, not a person. A measurement that did not fit. She sat on that bench for hours, unmoving, her back straight, hands composed, but her face betrayed her. Blotchy, tear-streaked, jaw clenched in shame she couldn't swallow. She was not a woman who expected pity. She had come west with the hope of building something new from the ruins of her past, and now that, too, had turned to ash. Still, she kept her gloves on, spine stiff, as if formality might preserve some shred of her dignity. When Henry spoke, it startled her more than it should have. His voice was low, steady, with no trace of judgment, just a man used to choosing words carefully and meaning each one. She glanced up, and her eyes, ringed with fatigue and betrayal, locked onto his. There was no spark of romance, no flicker of hope, just recognition, the same look she'd seen in the mirror too many times. "I should have known better," she whispered, the weight of that realization more brutal than the wind. "He wrote sweet words, but I guess he expected someone smaller." The sentence didn't beg for comfort. It stated a fact, plain as timber, but the quiet collapse in her shoulders said more. Henry didn't blink. "You've nowhere to go?" "No," she replied, and the word came out like a bruise. And then he said it. No hesitation, no kindness laced in charity, just a truth spoken from one damaged soul to another. "Then come with me." The first morning Annie rose in Henry's house, the walls didn't greet her. They simply were. Plain, timbered, and still heavy with the scent of a woman who no longer lived. The stove took time to warm, the pans were blackened from long use, and the only sounds were the slow ticking of the wall clock and the wind pressing against the window panes. She moved quietly, as if her footsteps might break something that hadn't yet healed. Henry didn't speak much. He offered instructions sparingly. How to feed the hens, where the well pump stuttered, how the back fence warped in spring's thaw. His voice was never unkind, just careful, measured like a man still relearning what it meant to speak to another human being. They moved around each other with a strange sort of grace, as though neither wanted to disturb the delicate truce between past and present. At town, the whispers began before their wagon even rolled past the first storefront. "Too fast, too strange," they said. "Why her? Why now?" Children stared, churchwomen clucked behind their hymnals. But Annie didn't flinch. She met every sideways glance with a quiet gaze that refused to apologize. She had been humiliated by the worst of men, strangers and sweethearts alike, and had survived. Gossip held no weight next to that. She baked anyway. Biscuits first, then molasses pie. She brought a dish to the potluck not to impress, but because it was what women did. Not to prove she belonged, but to feed people, the way she always had. The first bites were taken reluctantly, but the pie disappeared faster than expected, and the whispers grew fewer in the following weeks. Inside the house, a quiet rhythm took hold. Henry noticed how Annie folded dishcloths twice before putting them away, how she paused a moment before lighting the stove, as if remembering kitchens that had once belonged to other men, other lives. She didn't intrude on his grief. She let Martha's picture remain on the mantel, let her memory hover where it needed to. But little by little, without speaking it aloud, she began carving space for herself. A different apron on the hook, a needlework hoop resting on the windowsill. Then one night, he entered the bedroom and found the quilt. It wasn't store-bought, nor a replica of what had come before. It was Annie's, stitched in her hand, her time, her silence. Browns like the earth, blues like the Montana sky, and in the center, two trees, stitched close together but rooted apart, growing side by side. Henry didn't lie down right away. He sat on the edge of the bed, calloused fingers brushing across the threads. They didn't speak love in this house, not yet. But here, in cotton and needle, was something just as sacred, the quiet beginning of belonging. The wind rolled softly over the hills that morning, carrying with it the scent of earth waking up. Winter had finally loosened its grip, and the prairie stretched wide in green and gold, alive again. Annie stood still by the fence, apron dancing lightly at her hips. Her eyes narrowed against the brightness as she watched the way the sun touched everything, gentle and forgiving. She had learned to rise early, not out of duty, but rhythm. The house, once somber and silent, now breathed with a subtle steadiness. Behind her, the screen door creaked open, and Henry stepped out with a chipped mug in hand, steam curling up into the morning air. He didn't call her name, just stood there a moment, watching her. The curve of her silhouette against the light, the firmness of her stance. There was nothing delicate about her. Annie was not made for fragility, but there was a kind of beauty in her strength that caught him off guard more often than he admitted. "I never said thank you," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who never spoke without cause. She turned, half smiling. "For what?" He looked down into the coffee, as though searching its surface for the right words. "For staying. For stitching warmth into a place that had gone cold." Her expression didn't change right away. She just blinked once, slowly. Then that smile widened, quiet and deep, the kind that didn't need to reach the mouth to touch the soul. "You gave me a home when no one else would. I should be the one thanking you." They stood like that for a long moment, not needing more. The breeze stirred the dry grass and set it whispering, the same way the quilt rustled when one of them turned in bed at night. Something sacred lingered in the air, not ceremony, not confession, but understanding. Then Henry said it, simply, directly. "Let's get married proper." She looked at him, startled. Her eyes glistened, not with surprise alone, but with something older, wounds long closed, now swelling with warmth. "Henry, I'm not asking because you need saving," he said, stepping closer, voice low but unshaking. "I'm asking because I'm tired of walking past the room where you sleep and wishing I could call you mine. I want you with my name, if you'll have me." She didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. Her hand found his, firm and sure, and she squeezed it. Not like a girl swept up in romance, but like a woman who had stood in the cold and chosen, this time, to walk toward the light. They said nothing more. The wind carried the silence between them like a vow already spoken.